Hello and welcome to Raise a Glass, the podcast where we discuss the stories and storytellers that shape us. I am Hunter Danson.
And I am Eric Lintela.
And today we are talking about That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, the third and final book in his space trilogy, which we have done more or less in order.
This has been a very long trilogy with a very quick ending.
Yes. Yeah. But before we get there, Eric, what's in your glass?
I would like to begin with a newly found poem from C.S. Lewis related to a drink that is not in my glass.
Okay.
Mod priv ne wag by C.S. Lewis. Apologize for any mispronunciation. Hail, O hostess whose heart knows not the temper of Prebe. Talk was kindly. Wetted with whiskey the white blanket. Winter's weaving worked about us, till the house was hushed, the hearth brighter, and bedtime better in billowy nest. The strange stretched stove beside him, blessed blanket warm blithely slumbered, thro' noiseless night, noble weaver. Of people's peace your poor servant, not Wilk by name, on knee bended, gives you gramercy for a guest friendship.
Nice.
That is a newly found poem written by C.S. Lewis on whiskey and warm blankets. He wrote it in 1935 on notepaper from Magdalen College in Oxford, where he taught. One may be especially interested to hear C.S. Lewis using Old English, as this was a thank you poem from one medievalist to another who would have understood the language and the allusions to Beowulf. He wrote it after visiting the Manchester home of Dr. Ida Lillian Gordon, a specialist in medieval English and Old Norse. But I'd say it's especially interesting as a Tolkien fan, because usually when you think of Old English, you think of Tolkien and Beowulf.
Right.
And Tolkien's love for languages, not C.S. Lewis.
Well, C.S. Lewis was up there too. He was studying,
Of course.
the same things.
But I have a mixture of Bailey's and amaretto.
Oh, very nice.
A little watered down after we put the ice cube in a while ago, but I used a big spherical ice cube. I was going to do whiskey, but I realized that I had already drank the whiskey on the podcast. I don't have that many options. Also, interesting enough, the Bailey's is floating on the amaretto.
Yes.
So if you hear clinking.
Our very attentive listeners would be very upset if you repeated whiskeys, the same whiskey.
What? Did I say whiskey?
You said you did. You said you didn't do the whiskey because you had done it on a previous episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how many of our listeners would pick up on that.
Well, we've got to iterate. We can't be repetitive.
Right. Yeah.
People will listen to this show because we give new pizzazz, and they never know what is actually in our glass. I'm fairly certain a lot of our listeners just listen to the first 15 minutes so they can get through us talking about what we're drinking. Because, speed and efficiency of language is our primary objective. Hunter, what is in your glass, and what do you have to open it?
I have Guinness.
Okay. Nice.
C.S. Lewis was born in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have a little bit of Irish in me.
I would have gotten a Guinness out too.
This is a nitrogenated Guinness.
In case anybody's wondering, Hunter does not have a Guinness glass. Like officially from Guinness, but it
No,
is
I
very pretty
don't.
looking. And he's waiting for the head to decrease. You can see the little bit of the fun movement of bubbles. Is it on his nose? On his mustache? On his beard? No. Looks like must have been a little bit on his mustache. He just rubbed his mouth. How is it, Hunter?
It's good. I enjoy Guinness. I actually really enjoy nitrogenated stouts.
Okay. Yeah.
It just adds an extra smoothness, and it's good stuff.
I've had a couple. I had a black and tan recently, which is Guinness floating on top of a hard cider.
Oh, wow.
Which I've learned I like if the hard cider is not sweet.
Okay.
If it's very dry, I really enjoy it.
So, what are you raising and pouring your Baileys and Amaretto for this week?
I'm sure there's a name for that particular combination. I'm sure there's 20 names. We are in spring. I'm loving the beautiful weather, and my plants, my seedlings are getting ready. And so I'm raising a glass to that. Coming of summer, the chance to plant my garden. I'm very excited about that. And just kind of continue on that light type of thing. I'm pouring one out for the lingering winter. It snowed last Monday.
Yeah, it's really been chilly here. And like it's sunny and it's like, oh, it's gonna be a nice day, and it's like, nope, I still need my jacket.
Yep. I'd rather it be sunny and cold than not sunny and cold. So
Yeah.
I'm just excited to be. I'm okay with it raining if it's warm outside. Like I'm kind of excited for, just give me warm, and obviously sun too. But what are you raising and pouring one out?
Well, I am raising a glass to Need to Breathe.
Okay.
They just came out with a new album called The Long Surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to the title track, and I bought the album, and I've been listening to it. It's not my absolute favorite album, but I haven't really connected to a lot of their albums since Bo
You're a Bo
left.
guy.
I do. I love Bo. I just think it's just a great. I mean, I love Bear too, especially if you've seen
Everybody
Bear
does.
live.
He's fun.
He gives everything in the live shows.
Entertainer. I know just my last name.
But I connected with The Long Surrender. I think it's just a really timely album, and the tone of it. And there's some really beautifully written songs on it too. I'm probably enjoying the second track, Say It Now, and Highlands, and The Door. There's a lot that I like, but those ones that come to mind immediately. But definitely recommend it, and it's just good to reconnect with a band after I hadn't really been feeling them as much. You know, they'd come out with a new album, and there'd be a couple songs that I'd be like, yeah, I like this, but I'm not like so into it like I used to be. And
this is not a poppy album.
It's
really
not.
It feels very Need to Breathe-y.
But it's like very stripped down compared to the stuff that they've done recently.
It's not poppy. It's not like trying to be mainstream almost. It's trying to be more. It feels more of a songwriter, country folk, twang, lyrics matter.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And like nice, I think harmonies. A lot of nice harmonies.
Nice harmonies, nice instrumentation. beautiful melodies too. But I'm pouring one out for Wings of Fire. Have you heard of this?
What is this?
This new young adult series
Which one is that?
by Tui Sutherland. It's like a dragon soap opera, mixed with like I don't know. But I just read the graphic novel with my son. He was listening to like the first couple ones, and he was enjoying it a lot. And so we got the graphic novel from the library, and it's not bad. That's not why I don't like it. It's just the dragons. There's like no good characters. Not good in the sense that like they're interesting. It's good in the sense that they are like morally and ethically admirable. The closest that you get to goodness is like silly and naive characters.
Interesting.
So, it's entertaining enough, but I think the problem that I have is that there's just a lot of moral depravity. And
Who do you want your kids to be like, right? This is...
Yeah, and it's like, we're not that restrictive with our kids, but in terms of what we show, I mean, like, we show them age-appropriate things, but we're also not, like, scared about everything.
Yeah.
So, we talk about what goes on, and, there's, like, patricide and matricide and friendicide, and, like, there's, like, a lot of killing and violence, and it's interesting because I read a lot of the Warriors books growing up, a few of those.
I love those books.
And it's funny because Tui Sutherland, who's writing their Wings of Fire, actually worked on some of the spin-off series that Aaron Hunter did that weren't warriors, but were like bears and stuff instead of cats.
There's like 30 of those books.
Oh, there's so many. But it's just, St. Augustine didn't like a lot of Greek plays that were going on because he said that they displayed the heinous acts of the gods, like Zeus and especially Zeus does awful things. But he displays these acts, and even if in the play, the playwright is disapproving, you're still showing these awful things happening so that when people watch it, they can be like, oh, Zeus did it, so what I'm doing isn't that bad, and or like can kind of have that effect, and that definitely happens. So I don't believe in banning things or anything like that, but I do believe in discretion and praising what is good and excellent and morally and ethically. So that Hideous Strength is the third book, the conclusion of the Space Trilogy. C.S. Lewis called it a modern fairy tale for adults in the beginning. And I think it's important to understand he also opens with a quote from a poem by Sir David Lindsay, and he says, "The shadow of that hideous strength, 6 mile and more it is of length," and it is describing the Tower of Babel.
Mine did not open with that.
Yeah.
Mine does not have it anywhere on it.
He doesn't have the introduction in here?
He has a preface.
Yes, the quote is right before the preface.
No, it's not.
Oh.
This is what's before mine. To J. McCall. Something. McNeil.
Neil.
That is it. There is no quote.
That's interesting.
I'm sorry. Can you read that quote again? I feel like that gives a lot more clarity to this story.
The shadow of that hideous strength, 6 mile and more it is of length. And he also mentions his essay, well, two essays, The Abolition of Man in the introduction. And so that hideous strength, a modern fairy tale for adults, he's sort of doing what Dostoevsky did in Notes from Underground, this idea of taking things to the extreme to see where they go. And in that hideous strength, he takes the ideas that, are birthed from the Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel is a story in Genesis. Pretty short. You can read it in a couple minutes. We're not a YouTube show. And basically there are people who learn how to make bricks and fire bricks, and they all speak the same language, the people of the earth, and they decide that they're going to make a name for themselves and build a tower to the heavens. And God looks down. He says, look at these people, there's nothing they won't be able to do. And so he goes down and he scatters all the people and makes them speak different languages. And they're not able to build the tower because they can't talk to each other. And in The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis talks about, there a lot of things, but the thing that I picked out and that I want to pick out going through that hideous strength is C.S. Lewis talks a lot about what he calls the Tao. And what he means by the Tao, he's taking it from the Tao Te Ching, is this idea of truth, or if you want to call it like universal precepts of truth, some logos, this idea of the way that is, includes ethics in nature and is a way of living in harmony with those ethics of goodness. And he talks about how the spirit of progress that he identified in his day, which he identifies with Sir Francis Bacon, who wrote a lot about science and progress and technology and all this kind of stuff. C.S. Lewis says, well, the spirit of progress, this idea of doing away with tradition and living your life outside the Tao and trying to find these, it's like, oh, that's just an emotional response that you're having. When you try to you see a waterfall and you call it beautiful, and someone says, well, that's just a emotional response. Like, there's nothing about the waterfall that's intrinsically beautiful. It's just your emotions or whatever. And so C.S. Lewis develops this idea through The Abolition of Man, and eventually he says that when you try to see through everything, when you try to see through your emotional responses, through traditions and religions and things, the whole point of seeing through something is to see something else, but that what you end up doing is you actually, by trying to get to see through nature, you end up becoming a slave to nature, because there's really nothing left once you have stepped outside of the Tao and sort of relinquished its hold on you. All you have left are your natural impulses. And so you can see the way that he sets up in that hideous strength. We start out with a guy named Mark. He's kind of a milquetoast, but he works at a college. He's a professor. I think C.S. Lewis wrote about the college because he kind of knew the college. That was his part of his world that he could write about. And this society comes in called N.I.C.E. Can you help me with the acronym again?
In just a moment. National Institute of Coordinated Experiments.
The National Institute of Coordinated Experiments. And the goal of N.I.C.E. is really to make life more efficient, to make man more efficient, to use genetics and all these kinds of technologies to condition man, to sort of turn him into shape him. And N.I.C.E. comes in, and the college lets them come in. And Mark kind of gets swept up in this. N.I.C.E. comes in. It's sort of, he first sees it as like this guy named Lord Feverstone who's kind of like in N.I.C.E. and Mark just really wants to be in the inner ring, which is an essay that we'll also talk about. But the inner ring being like part of
in crowd.
Yes, the in crowd, the cool kids. He's been trying to do it his whole life, pretty much. And so he perceives N.I.C.E. as the ultimate inner ring. So he gets in with Feverstone, and they end up taking over the college. They start building all these things on the college, and they're going to do these experiments and stuff to make life better for the people of this nice English college town. Make them cleaner, more sanitary, more logical. And so Mark gets swept up in N.I.C.E. and he meets kind of the inner ring. And while that's happening, you also have Jane, who is Mark's wife. And Jane is having she's having dreams that are really unsettling to her. And it turns out that she is having like prophetic dreams about N.I.C.E. And she, through her housekeeper, she ends up actually meeting with Ransom, who's the main character of Paralaundra, which is the previous novel. And Ransom has really been kind of like transfigured by basically seeing the face of God. He's kind of like Moses, or
yes,
John the Baptist, or someone who walks with God. And he hasn't really set it up. He's just kind of let it.
A collection of people and animals have gathered around him.
Yes. Yeah, at St. Anne's. And it's sort of this like, I don't know. It's kind of like a retelling of, it's like a retelling of like, sort of like a Garden of Eden kind of, except it's not, because it's like redeemed in this redeemed society, because you have animals acting friendly and as they might have done, if we can imagine, in the Garden of Eden. So this is why it's like a fairy tale for adults, because it sounds very far-fetched, and fairy tale is like, but at the same time, I don't know if this was your experience, Eric. I felt like at points I was reading like a horror novel.
Okay.
This like C.S. Lewis doing horror, especially with some of the ways that he describes N.I.C.E. And the people in N.I.C.E. and the men who kind of and so what you see in the leaders of N.I.C.E. is that they have been reduced to their natural impulses, as C.S. Lewis says in The Abolition of Man. They're men without chests. They don't have any kind of filter or ethical framework or any kind of Tao to direct their course. They're just kind of like doing what they want to do. And I think this is most typified by kind of the main guy. Wither. Yes, Wither. He's like a collection of brain reactions, like when you're talking to him, and you could never get a straight answer out of him. Mark could
there's
never.
a great quote that I'll find for a little bit later.
Yeah, I know. There's several great quotes. Yeah, and within all this, there's quotes about technological progress and sexual emancipation and just everything that C.S. Lewis has been thinking about in the abolition of man. And as it goes on, it turns out N.I.C.E is trying to resurrect uncover the body of Merlin, which is supposed to be underneath the college, which is why they needed to get into the college.
Braxton Wood.
Yes. And because they think that Merlin represents another way to conquer nature. So they think that Merlin will be on their side because they want to conquer nature. They want to develop man into a more perfect being. And this is also, sorry.
To remember is part of what connects this book to pure N.I.C.E.
Yes. Conquering nature, yeah. And this is also an idea that C.S. Lewis talks about in The Abolition of Man, where he says that science and magic are kind of like twins. They come from the same impulse, which is the impulse to control nature, to enact something in nature. And of course, there's lots of caveats, which he himself talks about, being there are scientists who love knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And there were probably also alchemists and people who loved it were trying to, in their own way, to find truth. And so I don't think, by no means is C.S. Lewis anti-science, but I think he is anti the way that people use science irresponsibly as an end in itself to sort of like conquer nature and give themselves more power in the name of progress or mankind. But what does that actually mean? What does progress actually mean? And so we keep going.
While Mark is doing that, what is Jane up to?
Yes, Jane is with the people at St. Anne's. She meets Ransom, who all the people call Master, and Jane is having prophetic visions about what is happening at N.I.C.E, about the head, about Merlin. And so she's almost like a spy for them because she's having these visions. She can see what is happening. And so she ends up, N.I.C.E sort of comes after her, but she ends up going to St. Anne's and joining them. Mm-hmm. And she helps find Merlin because basically what the people at St. Anne's think is that, well, if they can get to Merlin first, then maybe they can prevent N.I.C.E from taking over the whole world, basically, because N.I.C.E is also in America.
The general thought is that whoever interacts with Merlin first, that Merlin will be naturally on that team's side.
Yeah, although I do think initially they think that they're going to have to like exercise Merlin or something like that. Yeah.
They think that N.I.C.E is going to control him, but there is also this thought that like I think there's still like if we get there first, maybe
they just don't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but if they just want to get there first to be able to, do something. And so what happens is Merlin turns out to be kind of on the good side, and N.I.C.E captures who they think is Merlin, but Merlin like found a tramp in the woods and switched clothes with him, and so N.I.C.E actually has a tramp, which is kind of funny. And Merlin is with the people at St. Anne's. There's a lot of stuff that happens. Some wonderful conversations with Merlin, and C.S. Lewis, I think, is like the perfect person to imagine what it would be like to interact with Merlin. Many years later, Merlin in a more or less present day, more modern time, because it's so cool. It's just
Is like
and
he's
there's all
not a
the
good
language,
man, but he's on the side of good.
yeah, and they speak in Latin. It's just it's so cool. But what happens is Merlin basically goes to Nice and recreates the Tower of Babel. The way that he takes down the enemy is he just confuses their speech, and all the animals go nuts, and all hell breaks loose, kind of literally. But and they end up winning, and Mark sort of gets converted, and there's lots of other crazy stuff that happens. But that's the sort of summary.
I would add
plot
to it that the leaders of N.I.C.E think that they have figured out a scientific discovery that is allowing them to take the next step in this humanity's life cycle, stage of humanity, to only have to worry, to no longer have to worry about human bodies. And the head of N.I.C.E is a quite literal head of a beheaded Frenchman who did some truly heinous things. And if I'm remembering correctly, I can't find the page for it. There is a learning that, in fact, it wasn't science keeping this thing alive. It was the Eldiel of the fallen Eldiel, the angels of the earth, which is a very shocking discovery shortly before the death of the the guy from N.I.C.E who's keeping his head alive.
Yep.
Andrew, that was I learned a lot as you shared that. Thank you very much. My summary was going to be very, very short. I would like to still give it because I think it provides a much more surface level reading of this book. But I think it also will help kind of drive some of my statement, right? Our podcast is about the stories and storytellers that shape us. And I think it will help you understand a little bit of how this book has and has not shaped me.
Okay.
Is that appropriate?
Sure. Yeah.
My telling is this is a story about a couple, Mark and Jane. Mark is a kind of a run-of-the-mill academic at an institute. His goal is to be part of the in crowd. A lot of similarities here. They are having difficulties in their marriage. They've been recently married within a year. Mm-hmm. Jane gave up finishing her PhD in the relationship. Mark is trying to make a name for himself. He is a very incredible writer.
Sociologist,
yes, sorry. And he ends up kind of falling into line with this group called N.I.C.E. And through a lot of bumbling interactions in their headquarters, he ends up working for the machine, writing articles, trying to change public opinion nationally and internationally about a French man who's beheaded. So and in the process is learning more and more that maybe he doesn't actually want to be part of this. Simultaneously, Jane, who I think is a much more interesting character. I think everybody thinks Jane's a more interesting character. She just is a better character. she's been having dreams, and they feel too vivid for they feel too vivid to her, and she ends up seeing things that she dreamed in the newspaper the next day. And so she ends up, through an acquaintance, going to this place called St. Anne's. And when she's there, she connects with the gathering of individuals there, and meets Ransom, who's the primary character of Out of the Silent Planet in Paralandra. She doesn't really believe or really want to be part of what's happening there, and tries to go back home. At this point, N.I.C.E has started controlling lots of things and has realized that Mark is married to Jane, and that Jane is a foreteller through her dreams. She's able to see the future. So Jane's in danger. She ends up back at St. Anne's. In the midst of all this, they're trying to... she envisions being Merlin, or interacting with Merlin, buried under Braxton Wood. And the group under Ransom realize the fight that they're entering into is a fight that is focused on this particular location with N.I.C.E, both the scientific aspect and then Merlin, this magical aspect. Things develop on both sides. Mark is trying to figure out how to get out of it. He ends up being framed for murder. Jane and Merlin and a bear called Mr. The Altitude. Nope. Yes. Baltitude. Mr. Baltitude.
Baltitude, yeah.
End up going to N.I.C.E to rescue Mark, pretty much, and to end N.I.C.E. And Merlin does a lot of crazy stuff, and so does Mr. Baltitude. Mark is able to get out. N.I.C.E is destroyed, along with like the Prime Minister and all sorts of individuals who've bought into this lie that N.I.C.E has propagated. And the story ends with the reconnection of Mark and Jane in what I would say is just a truly beautiful fairy tale ending in which you can see they've both grown a lot individually, separated, and long to see their relationship grow in their marriage. It was a little bit longer than I planned, but that's my telling of the story.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
There are clearly many layers at work in this story, and Hunter, I really appreciate the pieces you brought, and I would like to discuss them more. Before we get to that, I wanted to share kind of how this has impacted me. I remember reading Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra. I read them relatively quickly after each other. I was in grad school at the time. I was kind of late to the Space Trilogy game. I didn't know it was even a thing until I bumped into it at a bookstore, a really well-known used bookstore in Chicago. And it's like, oh, seems cool. I didn't know C.S. Lewis wrote science fiction. And I remember reading Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra and be like, these are completely different than any science fiction I've ever read in my entire life. They read more like narrative theology. And then they do explosive science fiction. Right? They do like beautiful literature with like deep theological conversations. And then I was like, okay, I'm excited. I'm going to check out that Hideous Strength. I'm going to read it because obviously I love the first two. I'll love this one. This book is as long as the other first two combined. And I could not get through this book. This book just ate at me. And it's not because it's not a really well written and I think enjoyable book. It's because C.S. Lewis chose to write it within an academic environment, which he named that he did because that's the environment that he knew well and like he could communicate about well. And every time I picked up this book to try to read it, and I think I read it over the course of like a year plus, or maybe 3 years. Honestly, it was a long time. I could make it like a page before I had to put it down because it was too reminiscent of what was at that point my lived experience in an academic environment. It was too full of, like, I didn't want to spend my downtime reading about things that made me think of my worst interactions with my university or academic colleagues.
That's interesting.
Because this interaction with N.I.C.E is just, it's a slog. It's just like, oh, come on. Yes, there are people. This is what this type of environment, I'd say at its worst, feels like. It feels like endless bickering. Everybody's talking around each other, trying to show they're smart at the cost of other people being lessened, and nobody giving clear directions to anybody, but an expectation that you get it and that you are, proving your own self in your own lane. And I don't care about any of that. It's endless posturing. It's endless building up arguments so that if somebody attacks them, you can tear them down. Or if they do make a good point that you hadn't thought about, you can easily deflect it by putting out a statement earlier to catch that type of thing. And it's just, and I do it in some of my language still. There are some really good things from it, I think. But there are also some challenges from it. And I just wanted to get to the Martians. I wanted to get to the... And this book doesn't deliver on that at all. Yeah. Like, I wasn't... Merlin is an interesting character, but I've been kind of interested in Merlin through my life, but not hugely interested in Merlin. I remember trying to watch the show Merlin enough times that finally I was like, I give up on the show. Mr. Baltitude's the most interesting character. Not really, but kind of. But what I remember about the story is a marriage that started in hardship. Two characters that developed separately from each other, and the ultimate connection back together. And I think in that way, this is not a love story by any means, but I think that is the kind of the chosen narrative, movement that C.S. Lewis has used. There's definitely a word in literature for what I'm trying to communicate, or a phrase. He's chosen these two deeply tied characters to help draw us through this story. And I really enjoyed following their story. I definitely wanted much more Ransom in it, and I don't feel like it was anywhere near the type of book that the previous had been. But I do think he names it at the beginning. It's a different genre of book than the previous two. The previous two are science fiction. This is mythos. So now, 6+ years later, we've now talked about this book over the course of 2 different meetings, and I have still not been able to read every single page of it again. I've read it and taken copious notes and highlighted things along the way, as you can see. And I've done I listened to a 2-hour radio broadcast of it which was very fun and really interesting to me. But it is stuck in my mind as a slog, and it just brings me back into that academic space, and I'm like, I do not want to be there.
That's interesting because it's funny to me that you say that you didn't want to read it because it was set in a space that you were familiar with, because a lot of the talk in publishing, marketing books is write what you know, and then people who are familiar with that setting will want to read it. Like, like it will relate to that. They'll be able to relate to it.
I related to it.
I had the opposite effect on you.
So the answer is I wanted to read it and I related to it, but I didn't want to read any more of it or finish it because it was too reminiscent of my experience. No, and yet it's not quite a satire. Like it is, but it is not. It's let me say it this way. It's the natural conclusion of the stream of thinking that drives decision making in academic environments. Like that is what N.I.C.E. is. It's the natural ending, most aggressive approach to.
So you're talking about N.I.C.E. too. You're not just talking about because they have a college meeting.
Yes, the college meeting is actually, I really appreciated part of the college meeting. Specifically, my favorite professors were the types of professors like Canon Jewell. If Canon Jewell wishes us not to hear his views, I suggest that his end could be better attained by silence. This is what happens at the end of this meeting. This guy, Canon Jewell, is of a previous... I'll keep going. Jewell had been already an old man in the days before the First War, when old men were treated with kindness, and he had never succeeded in getting used to the modern world. For a moment, as he stood with his head thrust forward, people thought he was going to reply. Then, quite suddenly, he spread out his hands with a gesture of helplessness, shrunk back, and began laboriously to resume his chair. The motion was carried. Those are the professors that I liked the most. Now, obviously, I did not have professors that were old during the First World War. And I don't necessarily mean old professors, but professors for whom kindness and care for others and mutual respect, even if they didn't agree, but for other professors and students, that's the type of thing that when those were carried forth in the way I was interacted with by professors, that's who I wanted to be with. And that this book is very clearly focusing in on a world where that type of professor is old news, is not allowed to be part of it. And one of my favorite parts of this story kind of hits on that a little bit more. We can talk about that later. Hunter, how has this story shaped you?
It's a loaded question. I read it very quickly. In contrast to you, I read it in less than a week.
Okay.
Just because I was excited to be reading C.S. Lewis again. It's funny because I read this originally for the N.I.C.E. episode.
Yes.
And so I went from N.I.C.E. to that Hideous Strength. And, nothing against Susanna Clark, but she's not C.S. Lewis. And I was just enjoying the ride. I don't have quite the same history as you do with, or experience with academic circles and that sort of thing. I mean, we went to the same college, but I guess I wasn't as attentive. I don't know.
Our experience in college was nothing like anything in this book.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a college that like really focused on the students.
Right, yeah.
And it focused on collaboration, or at least cooperation and celebration over competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I, as a lover of languages, not an expert in languages, but a lover of languages, I really enjoyed a lot of what he did with Merlin and the way that he talked in Latin, and there are some quotes in here that I loved. And I was also thinking about the Tower of Babel and about technology and the way that we used it. Interestingly enough, I actually read this on a Kindle because I couldn't get a physical book, fast enough. So if I have to read digitally, I like the traditional Kindle because it doesn't hurt my eyes, and it's less distracting. But I noticed that because I could just underline a sentence on the Kindle, and I couldn't write it down. Like I didn't have to write it down in my notebook.
Yeah.
I remembered less.
Yes.
Because I would just highlight it, and even when I like typed a little note in the Kindle, I remembered less, and I think that is relevant because this is a book that is about technology and the way that it shapes us, and I could not help thinking about the conversations that we're having about technology now, and the sort of spirit of really the Tower of Babel that I think is prevalent in these CEOs who are developing AI technology, and trying to thrust it upon us as like the next stage in human evolution and creativity that'll unlock human flourishing or something. And it's like, what are you talking about? It's just going to make more money for the people who can leverage it. Anyway, I think there are caveats to that conversation, which I want to talk about eventually. But I'm finding this quote. Also, the confusion moment when Merlin confuses everyone is really funny.
The audio recording of that was amazing.
Oh, I can believe it. Tides and Fugelman, I shield for that we all are most steeply rebut the defensible, though I trust lavatory, Aspasia, which gleams to have selected our redeemed inspector, this deceiving. I would be shark, very shark, from anyone's debenture. The woman who had laughed rose hastily from her chair. The man seated next to her heard her murmur in his ear, Vood Wooloo. He took in the meaningless syllables and her unnatural expression at one moment. Both, for some reason, infuriated him. He rose to help her to move back her chair with one of those gestures of savage politeness which often in modern society serve instead of blows. He wrenched the chair, in fact, out of her hand. She screamed, tripped on a ruck in the carpet, and fell. The man on the other side of her saw her fall and saw the first man's expression of fury. "But are you, blam it?" he roared, leaning towards him with a threatening movement. 4 or 5 people in that part of the room were now up. They were shouting. At the same time there was movement elsewhere. Several of the younger men were making for the door. "Bundleman! Bundleman!" said Withers sternly, in a much louder voice. He had often before, merely by raising his voice and speaking one authoritative word, reduced troublesome meetings to order. But this time he was not even heard. It really reminds me of James Joyce or Waiting for Godot. this like gibberish that's not gibberish, and yet it also sounds like it could mean something.
Mm-hmm. Have I read on this podcast the Jabberwocky?
I don't think so.
Let me grab this real quick. As long as we're going to make this a long episode, I might as well just add to it. It's a poem I first read in the poetry and literature course, introduction to literature course at the college uniquely situated on top of a hill. The story is called Jabberwocky. It's by a somewhat unknown guy named Lewis Carroll. Might have heard of him. He lived from 1832 to 1898. He's, anyways. Well, I guess I need to read the introduction to this. There was a book lying near Alice on the table, and while she sat watching the White King, for she was still a little anxious about him and had the ink all ready to throw over him in case he fainted again, she turned over the leaves to find some part of that she could read. For it's all in some language I don't know, she said to herself. It was like this. Bunch of words backwards. She puzzled over this for some time, but at last a bright thought struck her. Why, it's a looking-glass book, of course. Mm-hmm. And if I hold it up to a glass, the words will all go the right way again. This was the poem that Alice read. Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome wraths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal's sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tumtum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous Callot, Calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig and the slithy tobes did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome wraths outgrabe. I absolutely love that poem. It is a poem that has stuck with me for 14 years at this point. 13 years, 13 and a half years. And whenever I see something or hear something that is clearly a mocking of English, of communication, this is what comes to my mind. And I guarantee that C.S. Lewis had read this.
I'm sure he did, yeah.
This is, I mean, he talks about Alice in the Looking Glass, right? In the back, at the end of the Inner Ring.
Yes,
yeah.
I think so.
That's how the Inner Ring ends, the last sentence.
Yeah.
It is like the house in Alice Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how words can almost sound right. You just have to strain. If you strain a little bit harder, then you'll understand them. Mm-hmm. Hunter, that is wildly askew from our conversation.
Well, not exactly. I found the quote that I loved. and it's when both Merlin and Ransom are together in the room, and I think it's one of the El Deal is descending.
Okay.
The presence. I think it's the kind of like the presence of God is descending on the house at St. Anne's in preparation for kind of the final struggle with N.I.C.E.
Chapter 13, part 4.
See, this is the problem because I read it on a Kindle, so it's 82% into the book.
Okay, go for it.
Quick agitation seized them, a kind of boiling and bubbling in mind and heart which shook their bodies also. It went to a rhythm of such fierce speed that they feared their sanity must be shaken into 1,000 fragments, and then it seemed that this had actually happened. But it did not matter, for all the fragments, needle-pointed desires, brisk merriments, lynx-eyed thoughts, went rolling to and fro like glittering drops and reunited themselves. It was well that both men had some knowledge of poetry. The doubling, splitting, and recombining of thoughts which now went on in them would have been unendurable for one whom that art had not already instructed in the counterpoint of the mind, the mastery of doubled and trebled vision. For Ransom, whose study had been for many years in the realm of words, it was heavenly pleasure. He found himself sitting within the very heart of language, in the white-hot furnace of essential speech. All fact was broken, splashed into cataracts, caught, turned inside out, kneaded, slain, and reborn as meaning. For the Lord of meaning himself, the herald, the messenger, the slayer of Argus, was with them, the angel that spins nearest the sun, very Trilbia, whom men call Mercury and Thoth. And it was the phrase, Lord of meaning, that got to me because I've dabbled in poetry, written a couple sonnets. I know a little Latin and some Chinese, a tiny bit of Spanish. But, you know, I think anyone who appreciates language has tried to use it and study it, and not just study it, not just to use it, but for the love of it, for the beauty of it. You begin to realize that language is a tool. You know, it's like, you know, artists use paints, and I think the medium of visual art, it's like so obvious that you are using physical things that are not the thing that you're trying to represent, but you're using physical things to try and represent it, not just as like a realistic depiction, but, you know, maybe trying to capture the spirit of something or something like that. And language is the same way. It's like you realize the word is just a tool that is trying to describe something, you know, and if you study multiple languages, you realize, you know, that you can't just do one-to-one translations because languages are made by people, and we look at the world and we try to say something and try and make it come together, you know, and it comes back to this idea of the Tao, the way, the truth, the logos, the original word. And just imagining meeting the Lord of meaning himself, who made matter, who made us, who made meaning itself, and being able to finally see clearly what something I've been trying to describe my whole life. You know, Paul talks about seeing in a dim mirror. while we're here, you know.
Yeah.
I thought it was just a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I agree. Oh man, this is Hunter. There are, as normal, so many additional parts of this conversation we can have. We have been talking for quite a while already. I do feel like we've only kind of like just begun to kind of delve into parts of this book. And we have talked about it already with Pure N.I.C.E. Our goal in this podcast is never to mine all the depths of a thing. If that were the goal, we probably should choose much less interesting stories. I would give a pushback. You said something earlier that I do disagree with. I agree with the sentiment that yes, Susanna Clarke and C.S. Lewis are different. I love Pure N.I.C.E. as a story, and that world I think is superior to many. It's superior to this world that C.S. Lewis has created in this particular space. I'm not going to say it's superior to Irlandra or Falcandra. And obviously C.S. Lewis is just talking about a kind of a typical place with some mythological elements. But I do not want to allow the demeaning you were not that aggressive. I'm sorry, that's not the right wording. I really think the labyrinth is so beautiful in Pure N.I.C.E. At least in my reading of it, and that is not everybody's reading of it.
I think I think a lot of people like the house. I think that's fair. I like the house. I said that in our I was talking more about the style.
Okay.
Of the writing.
Yes, and
what I meant.
That's true. This is. I think you've shared before the change in language over the years, in terms of how many words on average people know and use.
Yeah, it's it's interesting. Style is like taste. It's something that you can say things about it that are true, but it is also subjective enough that there's always going to be someone who disagrees and hates what you love and loves what you hate.
True.
And everything in between the spectrum of love and hate.
Yeah.
I guess this is a personal thing. I have noticed a certain style that a lot of the more modern books that I've read, I think one of the main values is clarity. In the sense that the modern reader, maybe editors feel this way or authors, it's just the spirit of the times, I think, is the modern reader does not want to be confused.
Nope.
By the words. Because there are things in stories that are written now that are confusing ideas, complicated concepts, but the words themselves are very polished, very edited, very slick.
You should not have to read anything more than once.
Exactly. That's what it is. And there's value in that, depending on what you're communicating. But personally, when I'm reading fiction, I like things that have some meat that I have to think about. That
we also don't want to watch anything more than once anymore nowadays. And like that, I think there's best depth built into movies.
Yeah, and our attention spans are just getting shorter and shorter, and I think that ties into that hideous strength because the people who are in the inner ring of Nice, especially Wither, they you try to ask them, you can't get a straight answer
Yes.
out of them.
That's what I was trying to find that for a while. So I think that's a really good example of what makes N.I.C.E. of the type of interactions Mark has.
Yeah.
Hunter, we have not talked about Mrs. Hardcastle. Miss Hardcastle. We have not talked about like the fairies or the police or the murder of the one professor for whom he's like, yeah, no way am I going to be part of this corrupt nonsense. The physics professor whose murder is then pinned on Mark. We have not really discussed at length the beheading or the animation of the animals. We've not truly discussed most of this book. What we have discussed really well, and I think you've brought us into a really good space of understanding, is what the book is trying to accomplish. In many ways, the goals, and let me add something to that conversation. Okay. And then I would love to go to the inner ring.
All right.
This comes at the very end of chapter 9 in the book, probably about almost exactly halfway through, just slightly more than halfway through. And C.S. Lewis is writing about N.I.C.E. and the movement of N.I.C.E. to combine science and magic to the real destruction of humanity. The very experiences of the dissecting room and the pathological laboratory were breeding a conviction that the stifling of all deep-set repugnances was the first essential for progress. And now, all this had reached the stage at which its dark contrivers thought they could safely begin to bend it back so that it would meet that other and earlier kind of power. Indeed, they were choosing the first moment at which this could have been done. You could not have done it with the 19th century scientists. Their firm objective materialism would have excluded it from their minds. And even if they could have been made to believe, their inherited morality would have kept them from touching dirt. N.I.C.E. was a survivor from that tradition. It was different now. Perhaps few or none of the people at Belbury knew what was happening, but once it happened, they would be like straw in fire. What should they find incredible, since they believed no longer in a rational universe? What should they regard as too obscene, since they held that all morality was a mere subjective byproduct of the physical and economic situations of men? The time was ripe. From the point of view which is accepted in hell, the whole history of our earth has led up to this moment. There was now at last a real chance for fallen man to shake off that limitation of his powers which mercy had imposed upon him as a protection from the full results of his fall. If this succeeded, hell would be at last incarnate. Bad men, while still in the body, still crawling on this little globe, would enter that state which, heretofore, they had entered only after death, would have the diuturnity and power of evil spirits. Nature, all over the globe of Tellus, would become their slave, and of that dominion no end, before the end of time itself could be certainly foreseen. my lens, my primary lens in which I view the world is through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been reading a lot about justice, and with that, human dignity, and with that, human worth, and with that, conversations around morality, and different viewpoints or approaches to humanity or to like philosophical, theological questions that either lead towards humans are just the most recent and repugnant goo that has shown up on this earth of no more value than sand, to the life of a single human is of greater value than the creation of all other items combined. And as much as I speak in frustration about the academic setting, it probably should be telling to me that this passage is highly academic in thought, is what I keep coming to and thinking about. And I think it sets the... You brought up the idea of horror earlier. Like, this sets the tone for which that is possible. This passage clearly communicates the stakes that this book is trying to address. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's myth, and yes, some of this stuff is truly ridiculous. And yet I find this terrifying and all too possible in a modern life, in a quote unquote modern society or postmodern society.
Postmodern.
Postmodern. Triple postmodern. We talked earlier about N.I.C.E, and this is probably where that came from. Where I was saying this, they are the logical conclusion of a whole brand of thinking within the academic space, and I think this is what that's showing. Right, this idea that indeed they were choosing the first time in history, my words, at which this could have been done. It goes back to that fun little quote I was sharing from Canon Jewel. This professor, this older, kinder professor, from a days before when old men were treated with kindness, and he had never succeeded in getting used to the modern world. And people around him were just yelling at him, shouting at him to sit down. And now this is then connecting with the need for Merlin in the story, where if you add like a pre-modern magic, like power over creation, to a modern scientific... Science is not, anathema to God.
Yeah.
That they're not two sides of a coin. And that was a core flaw in Christian history. It's a core flaw within so many different popes, and even within American Christianity, this God of the gaps, this idea that things we can't explain are thus God. And then, well, if you can explain it, then it can't be God. God's going to keep getting smaller and smaller as we explain more and more parts of the universe and more parts of how things work. And it's just like that's not true. In fact,
Yeah.
I would say it's more of like we're mining the depths and learning more and more about how God created things. And how cool is that? Is it that even the smallest structure of things has echoes in the largest structures of things, and like the intentionality and purpose behind these things, and the things that we have yet to learn. That is a beloved side trail for me to go down. I could have read another 20, 30 sentences, and it would have given us more understanding and like, how does truth, relate to these conversations of power, of scientific discovery, of rationality, of morality, and how easy is it for the subjugation of all things to rationality to lead to ultimate depravity?
I think the interesting thing is that, right? Thank you for sharing that, Eric. That was lovely. But I think I wouldn't say it's rationality. I would say it's because at the end of the day, N.I.C.E is going even outside rationality.
Yeah, that's true.
And when I think because some people, rationality is their Tao, and philosophy and Kant's transcendental unity of the apperception.
You completely lost me.
I've lost myself. I've tried to read some of Immanuel Kant. It's just, that's the hardest reading I've ever done. But I think about this returning to the spirit of progress that C.S. Lewis saw in his day and that we're seeing now. I think the ridiculous thing is that the way that CEOs of AI talk about their products, they're like saying that decelerating the and I'll put some articles. I just read them this morning. Decelerating the progress of AI is costing human lives because of all the problems that AI is going to solve, cancer and world hunger and things like that. And it's this sort of mindless obsession with progress, when the real true irony of it is that what's costing human lives is, environmental issues, greed, unnecessary wars and conflicts. Technopoly, I think, it was written in 1994, and he talks about how, which was kind of like the information age. It was about information and the dissemination of information that was enabled by the internet. And he asks, he's just like, can these problems really be solved by more information? Is that what is holding us back? Because is not having a supercomputer what is holding us back from solving world hunger and income gaps and poverty in the economy? No, it's greed. It's greed. It's the consolidation of power. It's aggressive marketing with no caps on it or any kind of Tao to say, hey, that's this, you're taking this too far. We're so good at turning our means into ends and making ends of our means. It's just, and what you talked about science and faith, and I also agree with you that's a false dichotomy. And I think there are a lot of scientists out there who would agree.
Right.
And because you just have to ask, like, to what end? What do we do? Why are we doing this? Why are you making these things? Like, and it's not that I don't think that AI doesn't have some uses,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel that the overwhelming way that it's going to be executed is in like marketing and things where really, really quantity rules. And if you look at all the other, productivity technologies, like, it hasn't made us have to work less. We work more, and they pay us less to do more things. It's just, anyway. This is kind of a rant. I'm sorry, but this is what this book is about. It's like, he's carrying these ideas to the extreme. This idea of progress, and it's like, okay, yes, science, learning, knowledge. It's all good. And I'd like to point out there's an actual scientist in this book, and he gets murdered by N.I.C.E.
Yeah.
And it's important, like, when you are within the Tao, you have balance. Like, when in the, as he talks about the abolition of man, it's almost impossible to explain to someone who is outside of it. Where you're within the Tao, where you can believe in science and the pursuit of knowledge, but you can also have an ethical balance where you can say this is not the only thing that matters, and you can pursue things and not be controlled by them. And I'm going to try and connect this. If you're still with me after this rant, thank you. I'm sorry. Something I wanted to talk about that actually shaped me. One phrase that I remembered is at the end when Mark is coming back to St. Anne's and he's thinking about Jane and their marriage. He repeats, how had he dared to touch Jane, to approach her, as because he's seeing her in his mind as beautiful, as a reflection of that good and beautiful love. And what I want to think about is the fact that N.I.C.E, which has like a quote unquote liberated female, which honestly I feel like Hardcastle is kind of the weakest point for me. I just thought it was kind of too extreme.
Yeah.
And I think that might be a sticking point for people who read the book. But what I want to point out is that N.I.C.E, which has abandoned all ethics and morals, is sexless. N.I.C.E, you would think the N.I.C.E would be, having orgies, and where they do sort of have these the weird things, terrifying things that happen with old naked men when they're prostrating themselves before the head. But overall, N.I.C.E is they don't. There's no pleasure in N.I.C.E.
Yep.
It's not a nice place to be. And then at the end of the book, you have the basic Paralandra, who's Venus, descending on St. Anne's. And it's really a lovely passage. And I think it's a lovely chapter. And to describe it, I think would not do it justice. But you have like the true love and beauty and, the true, the blessing of the God who actually created sex descending on people, and you have the spirit of that, and the spirit of Solomon's Song of Songs in the Bible, and celebration of love. And what I was thinking about is pornography. And I'm going to cite fightthenewdrug.org. They do a lot of studies and things and articles. And one of their slogans that they have is called is porn kills love. And what can happen to someone who's addicted to porn is they will lose interest in actual sex. And they can actually have problems like making actual love because they're addicted to an artificial love, an extreme love. And I was thinking about how porn, in a way, is kind of total abandonment of authenticity and honesty and, the way of the Tao. And because, within the Tao, and this is shaped by my worldview as a follower of Christ, God created sex, and it's a good thing, and it's a powerful thing in the right context. When you have two people who love each other and who are committed to each other for their whole life and only each other, it's a very powerful thing. And then when you take it and you turn it into like a form of entertainment on a screen, it totally distorts it. And I thought it was kind of fascinating that C.S. Lewis, when he was writing this, kind of pegged, I don't know if it was intentional or not, he probably had some subconscious things that, as we all do, that, it's interesting because C.S. Lewis would have read Freud, and Freud had some issues with sex, to say the least. I'm not a psychologist by any means, but if there's one thing I know about Freud, it's that he talked a lot about our subconscious, suppressed whatevers. And so C.S. Lewis might have been kind of like responding in a way, or subconscious. Writing is such a mysterious thing, but this idea that you have the redemption of sex with the people at St. Anne's versus this sexless society in N.I.C.E, and how we have that happens in our society with pornography, and you would think that quote unquote liberating sex would lead to more pleasure, more goodness, whatever. If it feels good, it is good, but it really leads to the opposite. Like, and there's a lot of stories. If you go to Fight the New Drug, they have stories about people and personal stories that people share. Stuff.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. I've been thinking about throughout these conversations on these books. These are not books that are made into movies, and they wouldn't be good choices because the visual medium of telling it, at least in our current culture, in all three of these books, there are multiple characters that are naked at different points. And at least in the first two, like there's no like sensual aspects of it. and especially Paralandra. Like, it's not meant to be a sticking point. It's actually it's in many ways what C.S. Lewis is trying to do, especially in Paralandra, is like redeem the story of the Garden of Eden,
Right. Yeah.
and talk about use the story, the medium of writing, to depict what it could look like in another world after Christ has died and rose. And this book maybe is probably the one that could most be made into a movie. It would probably make the least interesting of movies.
It would be terrifying.
I wouldn't. I don't think I'd really enjoy it. But I think a part of this is the way that Lewis is trying to communicate so many of these scenes to a modern American viewer, and like we don't. I'm not aware of filming techniques, or filming approaches that are able to convey the same message that Lewis is trying to convey in writing.
I think you'd have to change it a lot. And,
But it would by that decision, like, would feel like a censoring of the story. And
I feel like the filmmaker would have to pick like one or two themes that they could illuminate in the film and just focus on those themes, because there's so much here that
Can we discuss the inner ring as a kind of closing of this book?
Yes.
Hunter, you had us read The Inner Ring, which is a what would you call it? An article, short story, letter, periodical.
Yeah. It's an essay.
Essay. Thank you.
It was
that word.
It was originally a talk that he gave at a college. It was the memorial lecture at King's College in the University of London in 1944. And so I believe he's talking to young people in college, and he decides to give them some advice. He opens it with a quote from War and Peace, and he says, when you invite a middle-aged moralist to address you, I suppose I must conclude, however unlikely the conclusion seems, that you have a taste for middle-aged moralizing. I shall do my best to gratify it. In the passage that he quotes from War and Peace, a character named Boris enters a room, and Prince Andrei, who's one of the main characters from War and Peace, is talking to an old general. They're both in the army, and the moment that Andrei sees Boris, Andrei stops listening to the general, even though Andrei is just a captain, and he addresses Boris. And Boris could see that side by side with the system of discipline and subordination which were laid down in the army regulations, there existed a different and more real system, the system which compelled a tightly laced general with a purple face to wait respectfully for his turn, while a mere captain like Prince Andrei chatted with a mere second lieutenant like Boris. Boris decided at once that he would be guided not by the official system, but by this other unwritten system. And C.S. Lewis labels the sort of unwritten system as the inner ring with capital letters. And it is basically these unwritten rules that you see the use of particular nicknames or a manner of conversation, it's really hard to pin down. The moment that you start trying to define it or that you speak it out loud is the moment that you will never get into the inner ring.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he says, he identifies this as kind of a feature of society. And he doesn't say that, like we're never going to be able to escape the existence of inner rings, and that there are probably rings that are not distinctly bad. Like, if you are the only people at your company who can do a certain job, then,
Mm-hmm.
That's a natural inner ring.
If you're a musical quartet and you don't have space for more instruments and you're all playing music because you love playing it.
Yeah, that's an inner ring. But he says, the existence of inner rings is one thing, but the desire to get into them is quite another thing.
He discusses it as you're trying to continually delve into an onion to get to the inner ring. And by the time you've gotten all the way through the onion, there's nothing there.
Yeah, because, if your only goal is just to get in, he asks the question, like, has this desire to get into the inner ring ever led to anything that you were proud of saying or doing? Just to get into the ring,
If so, your case is more fortunate than most.
And I connected this to Mark, obviously, because I believe C.S. Lewis actually names the inner ring. He uses the word inner ring. In Mark's kind of desire at the beginning of the book, it's like the progressive element at the college, and then it becomes nice. And Mark is defined by his desire to get in the inner ring. That's the only thing that he wants, that he names, is just he wants to be in. He doesn't seem to want to write a great book or work or discover some kind of cool thing, even though he talks about it. But all of his actions, up until the end of the book, really are just trying to get in for the sake of being in. And he says, of all the passions, the passion for the inner ring is most skillful in making a man who is not yet a very bad man do very bad things. And we see how Mark kind of ends up writing sociology articles to justify N.I.C.E.'s actions, which are kind of by the end starting to amount to like genocide and doing experiments on criminal prisoners. And have you encountered inner rings in your life, Eric?
Well, his point is that everybody in every situation, when other people are involved, engages in or interacts with inner rings.
Yeah.
We both were part of the same social club while we were in college, and there was a felt inner ring.
Yeah.
I would say that sometimes different people can have different views about who is in the inner ring, and maybe they're different inner rings, but it always hurts to be cast out of an inner ring, or to see one exist but you're not part of it. It always hurts when you are trying to build your identity around it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a piece for me in my life, is realizing what my true goals are
Yeah.
and purpose. Because that is very freeing.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes on to discuss that a little bit in this article.
Yeah.
This essay. I'm sure there are many times in my life that I've been part of the inner ring, but I very quickly think about the inner rings that I was not part of, that I saw develop around me, some of which I wanted to be part of, some of which I wanted to have nothing to do with, some of which confused me, some of which I was jealous of. I think I'm slowly learning and growing to let go. How about you?
Yeah, I think I've definitely found myself in rings and outside of them. I think up until embarrassingly recently, I haven't successfully identified the desire to be in a ring as something bad. Even though, like, not just like a social clique, for me it's more like being in a band has been something that I've always wanted to do and be a part of.
Yeah.
And it hurts when I see other bands, I see on YouTube or bands that I love, talked about Need to Breathe. It's like for a long time I dreamed, fantasized about being in a band like Need to Breathe or something like that.
Yeah.
And I would say, oh, well, it's a passion, like, follow your dreams or, but, the more I think about it, the more being in a band is not going to solve my problems. And it's gonna create a whole new set of problems.
Yeah. And he names as soon as he says this, sorry. Once the first novelty is worn off, the members of this circle will be no more interesting than your old friends. Why should they be? You are not looking for virtue or kindness or loyalty or humor or learning or wit or any of the things that can really be enjoyed. You merely wanted to be in, and that is a pleasure that cannot last. As soon as your new associates have been stale to you by custom, you will be looking for another ring. The rainbow's end will still be ahead of you. The old ring will now be only the drab background for your endeavor to enter the new one. You merely wanted to be in, and that is a pleasure that cannot last.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I guess for me, my desire has shifted to, like, I just want to write good songs and find ways to produce and perform them with good people. Which is a very different thing, and it's freeing. And I think when I reread this, it was this quote, I think, that hit me. If in your working hours you make the work your end, you will presently find yourself all unawares inside the only circle in your profession that really matters. You will be one of the sound craftsmen, and other sound craftsmen will know it. This group of craftsmen will by no means coincide with the inner ring or the important people or the people in the know. It will not shape that professional policy or work up that professional influence which fights for the profession as a whole against the public. Nor will it lead to those periodic scandals and crises which the inner ring produces, but it will do those things which that profession exists to do, and will, in the long run, be responsible for all the respect which that profession in fact enjoys, and which the speeches and advertisements cannot maintain. And I think perhaps if I read the next paragraph, it would be a good place to end, unless we have more to add.
Go for it.
And if, in your spare time, you consort simply with the people you like and do podcasts with the friends that you like, you will again find that you have come unawares to a real inside, that you are indeed snug and safe at the center of something which, seen from without, would look exactly like an inner ring. But the difference is that the secrecy is accidental, and its exclusiveness a byproduct, and no one was led thither by the lure of the esoteric, for it is only 4 or 5 people, or 2, who like one another, meeting to do things that they like read C.S. Lewis. This is friendship. Aristotle placed it among the virtues. It causes perhaps half of all the happiness in the world, and no inner ring can ever have it.